Oh, yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Am I on mute? I
You're
am.
mute.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Darker Than Blue. It is Friday, August 2nd, and I am Jackie Lukman, your host.
Can't hear you. I still can't hear you.
Still can't hear me. Okay, let's see what's going on. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's the problem. Can you hear me now? Hear me now. Are we good?
I got you. We're good.
Fantastic. Just a little bit of Friday shenanigans, y'all. Welcome to another episode of Darker Than Blue here on WPFW FM in Washington, D.C. I am Jackie Lukman, your host, and today is Friday, August 2nd, and woo, it's a steamer today. Goodness gracious, this is the heat that we hoped would go away, but it won't. It keeps creeping back in. That's climate change for you. I've been checking my garden every day practically, and man, the tomatoes are really just being very shy because it is very, very hot. Tomatoes and cucumbers do not like growing when it's too hot. It's been too hot for them, but we've had a few days of reprieve, and hopefully tomorrow we'll get a little bit more of a reprieve so that I can finally have my tomatoes and cucumbers, because there is no summer for a gardener without fried green tomatoes and cucumber salad, especially when you're from the South, because that's how we do. Thank you so much for joining us here on Darker Than Blue. Today is an absolutely special occasion because there's so much going on in the world, and we try so hard to keep up with everything that's going on in the world. We do have a guest today, but I have to say, before we get started, that the views and opinions that you hear on this show are those of myself, the host, Jackie Lukman, Darker Than Blue, and our guests here on this show, and are not necessarily reflective of the opinions and the views of WPFW 89.3 FN, our FM. So look here, let's get to it. A lot has gone on in the world. There have been elections going on all over the place. The United States government is deciding that they're going to call another country's election for them once again, and that country this time is Venezuela. Our comrades in Venezuela have just had an election that has concluded, and from what we know, from what we've seen, the election results reflect one thing that has been announced in Venezuela. But of course, the U.S. government, the imperialist U.S. government, sees it a different way. But we here on Darker Than Blue do not want to hear from the U.S. government, the State Department, and what they have to say about the elections in Venezuela. We have one of the 900 election observers from 95 countries, mind you. You heard that correctly, folks. 900 election observers were invited to Venezuela from 95 countries all around the world just to observe that the election was free, fair, and legitimate. And one of those election observers is joining us right now, and that is Ajamu Baraka. Ajamu, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Had to have you on because, of course, it did not take long for the U.S. government to decide that they needed to present a different narrative about the election outcome that just happened in Venezuela. But before we get to the U.S. response, Ajamu, I want to ask you about the mood of the people in Venezuela during the election. What was the attitude in the streets like? What were the people feeling? Was it an attitude of jubilance? Were people stressed? Were people concerned? What was it like in Venezuela leading up to the election?
Very good question. I think if folks who are listening to you remember some of the images right before the vote itself. What you saw were images of huge crowds of people in the streets who were demonstrating their support for their process. So there were huge demos across the country, and in particular in Caracas, of supporters of the Bolivarian process. The people understood the terms of this election. They understood that there was going to be a strong possibility that the imperial powers led by the US would attempt to undermine the process. Uh, they may even go as far as they did before and pretend like there's another government and that recognized the legitimacy of the process. And so they understood that their vote was a vote not only to affirm their commitment to their own process, but it also was a vote that demonstrated their resolve, that they were not going to go back, they were not going to surrender their dignity and their national self-determination. So that was the sense that we felt as soon as we landed in the country. And I got there a few days late because of the issues people might remember with the worldwide internet outage. Okay. And so I delayed tickets and everything else. But the day I came in was one of the biggest rallies they had in the country. And I thought it was on the 25th of August. So this was the mood. And in talking with people on the day of the vote, that mood continued. People understood. They came out in large numbers, long lines, in order to cast their votes. And they were lined up even before most of the voting booths opened up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that was the attitude. The attitude was one of defiance, one of support and struggle.
Mm. And so, obviously, now that the election has ended, and according to the current electoral commission, President Nicolas Maduro won the election. Now, the margin might have been closer than a lot of people may have wanted, but according to the poll results, Ajamu, President Maduro is still the president of Venezuela, correct?
There's no doubt about that, at least in the minds of people who observed the election and in the minds of people outside of the collective West, that the process was a clean process. In fact, I think many people understand or know that it's very difficult to manipulate votes in that process because they do have so many checks, including the audits of the machines before, during, and after the election, the paper ballots that are supposed to correspond in number with the electronic votes, the opportunity for all of the parties to have their observers in the precincts across the country. These are some of the things that they have put in place to make sure that their process was in fact clean. And so if there's so-called manipulation, then the opposition has to really demonstrate how that happened and show us the numbers. Now we know that they released with the support of the New York Times and Washington Post some phony numbers that they claimed that they got from some of the precincts where it was clearly they were in the majority, but it wasn't numbers from across the country. But those numbers are still being compiled, and the slowness in that compilation was the result of a very focused, orchestrated cyber attack with the objective of delaying the communication of all the final data in order to do what? To cast doubt on the process itself. And let me say something else about that process.
Mm-hmm.
According to Venezuela law, all of the different polls have at least 30 days. I mean, all of the process has 30 days uh, to issue the final data on the election. But what was being demanded by the West was immediate data. Now, I raised that too to make this point. Some of you all may have heard or saw that about a week ago, the state of Pennsylvania announced that in the upcoming election, that they thought it was unrealistic for the states to be in a place to be prepared to issue the final results in the time frame that people were expecting. And they wanted to let people know that they were going to need to have weeks in order to be able to compile the final data for the election in their state. Now, this is important on two levels. One is it demonstrates the complexity of these kinds of processes. But secondly, here you have a state, Pennsylvania, that now has a GDP that exceeds that of Venezuela because of the sanctions. The Venezuelan GDP has been reduced dramatically. But here's this rich state in the United States of America says it's very complex, very difficult to have numbers that quickly. And they wanted people to be aware of that, so there wouldn't be any nonsense, any questions being raised by any party on that process. But here in Venezuela, suffering years of sanctions, who had their GDP reduced, their budget reduced from $56 billion a few years ago to less than $1 billion. It went down to $700 million.
Wow.
They were operating off of 1% of the revenue they used to bring in. 1%. Okay.
And that's all due to sanctions.
How else do you reduce scope from 56 billion to less than a billion? Yes, this was economic attack, economic warfare. So with those meager kinds of resources, they still were able to organize an election, but to withstand the attempts to undermine that election. So it was really unfair when you had institutions as early as Monday and Tuesday demanding these final numbers. And it's also so hypocritical too, Jackie. Here you have, the U.S. Today, because they knew that that the numbers are going to come out of Venezuela, so they jumped the gun and announced that they're going to recognize Gonzalez as the legitimate president. We asked a very simple question: based on what?
Right.
Based on what data? They condemned the Trump forces for making similar claims, and they claimed that they had significant data to back up their accusations. But that was just summarily dismissed. But these reactionaries in Venezuela can just assert and show some flimsy numbers that they won and is supposed to be accepted. So this is the kind of hypocrisy and crudeness in the propaganda that we have to deal with. You would expect, though, that it's so crude and so transparent that they couldn't pull off a Juan Guaido 2.0. But, because you have almost like a childlike innocence among elements in the West, including elements of the so-called left, they can achieve their objectives, their backward reactionary objectives, in such a crude fashion. So this is what we have to deal with. This is, this is the process, and this is the reality that we're dealing with right now. This is, a Juan Guaido 2.0, and it is the U.S. of all countries pretending like they are concerned about democracy.
Yeah, that was pretty laughable, I thought, when the State Department came out and made their little announcement that, we recognize the opposition leader actually won. I'm like, wow, they really have not let go of this Juan Guaido kind of fantasy in Venezuela. But the whole situation with the opposition party, that's been a circus for a while. The leader of the opposition, this woman named Maria Corina Machado, I guess, was the original opposition candidate, but she was, according to the U.S. media, now I don't know what the story is behind this, so this is why we're asking you, she was barred from participating in the election, apparently. At least this is the way the U.S. reports it. What was really the issue there?
She was barred. The Supreme Court barred her from participating because it was discovered that she was a public official outside of Venezuela, and that was in a contradiction to Venezuela law. But it goes further than that. She has been part of the violent right-wing activity in the country for quite some time. She called for a direct military intervention into the country. Many people say that that was also in violation of the laws and practices of Venezuela. In fact, they say she's a traitor. So she's part of the most violent wing of the opposition. It's important to people understand too that the opposition right now is split. They sort of splintered right after the Juan Guaido fiasco. And so they really couldn't get their act together. And so she sort of emerged and almost kind of imposed her will on the opposition, but she didn't have full support of the opposition. Once the Supreme Court said that she could not run, then she basically got this Gonzalez individual, Edmundo Gonzalez, to stand in for her. But everybody knew that Gonzalez was, in fact, Machado. Okay. Now, if you understand anything about and been following any Venezuelan politics for any time, a cursory knowledge of the politics in this country would lead you to the conclusion that it is absolutely absurd to believe that this opposition, those forces, could garner 70% popular support among the Venezuelan electorate. I mean, if they would have come out maybe a little bit less, maybe say 58 or something.
That might have been believable, but
it could have been more plausible. Chavez never garnered 70%. Correct. So this is absolutely ridiculous, and everybody knows it. But it was taken seriously by the propagandists and hacks pretending to be journalists in the West and in the U.S. so-called legacy press, and that is what it was then bombarded by that press to the American population. So it's ridiculous, but it's enough to create the doubt and to continue to the sanctions, because that's really was the objective. They understood that because the opposition was splintered, that opposition was not going to win, and therefore they had their playbook ready for another round of sanctions and to not recognize the government of Venezuela.
It's wild that this is still going on, that the U.S. is still committed to this regime change in Venezuela. But as we've been talking about for a couple of years now, really intently, as we see the contradiction sharpening and these struggles converging, all happening at the same time. This is an example of the empire desperately trying to hold on to its power and influence over a country like Venezuela, but understanding that they really never could have the kind of power influence inside Venezuela that they wanted to, because the people have repeatedly, over and over again, Ajamu, been very clear about who the enemy is and have been very active in challenging U.S. imperialism inside the country. So what is your perspective on I guess I'm looking for, because everybody gets tired of being in a fight that they're just constantly in, right? Do people get tired of fighting? Did you get that sense from the people in Venezuela the day after the election, after when the right wing comes out and they're committing violence in the streets and they're trying to carry out a coup? Do you get the sense that from the people in Venezuela that they're like, oh, not again, not these people again. They're not doing this again. When are they going to leave us alone? Have people grown weary of this fight against U.S. imperialism?
Well, there's two aspects to your question. Have the supporters of the revolution have they been beaten down? And not really, but some have succumbed to the pressure. And that's one of the objectives of the sanction process and the warfare that is reflective of that process and the subversion of their politics and the attacks on the revolution in general. It is to wear the people down. It reminds us of the same tactics that were used in Nicaragua with the counter-revolution that they supported and the beating down of the people to the point that by 1990, some people basically sort of cried uncle, and they voted in the opposition. But of course, the opposition was not able to reverse some of the gains of the revolution. They were not able to really provide the kind of material support that the people needed because they clearly re-embraced neoliberalism that had the consequence of redividing the society, producing new numbers of impoverished people, and the result was that the Sandinistas were able to reclaim power in 2006. So this is what they do. But the other component of your comments is that those reactionary forces that went to the streets for a minute on Monday, I didn't get a sense that there was a kind of fervor that we saw among those forces back in 2014, 2017. It wasn't the same because I believe that many of them are tired. Many of them don't have the appetite for the kinds of traumatic violence that we saw in the society. And so that's why it was relatively short-lived. There were still incidents even on Tuesday. We were held up in our hotel because we were spread out across the city in like 5 different hotels. And we happened to be, a bunch of us happened to be less than 100 at a hotel that in essence was in enemy territory, if you will. It was
Wow.
behind the lines. It was in a upper class community, of course, controlled by the opposition. That's where the opposition leadership comes from.
Wow.
And they were rattling and their plots and having organizing rallies right on the corner by the hotel. So, they were there, but I don't believe that they have the appetite to sustain the kind of violence that we saw before. So, yes, people are prepared to accept the inevitable that this is a revolution that's not going to be reversed. But of course, they are going to they will suffer as a consequence of the actions by the U.S. directed at their country.
And, I can't help but wonder about the toll that this continued attack, this continued economic and political warfare, uh, sanctions, everything short of just boots on the ground in Venezuela. What kind of toll do you think this has taken on the Maduro administration? I think the margin of victory was maybe smaller than some people were comfortable with. I'm not sure about the finality of the numbers on the margin of victory but right now, but do you see that the Maduro government has suffered or slowed down or has not been able to operate as effectively for the people as they would have been in the past had they not had to deal with all of this as consistently for as many years as they have been?
Well, I mean, clearly, when we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that when your income is reduced from $56 billion to less than $1 billion, that's very difficult. When there's a tax on your currency where it is over 300% inflation, it takes a toll on the people, and it takes a toll on the leadership in the government and in the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, Venezuela. So it is very difficult. I mean, they are in a fight for their lives, but they have been able to sustain themselves. I mean, my perception is that morale is still high. And you saw it being demonstrated in these mass actions. So it is, it can be disappointing that you have to deal with this or continue to deal with this attempt to undermine your independence by the hegemon from the north and their allies. But that is part of what a revolutionary signs up for. You don't, I mean, that comes with the territory. And so, the party is standing firm. The people that are supporting the process are standing firm. What we have to do outside of Venezuela is to stand firm with the people of that country. And for us, that means opposing U.S. policies, but also it means, unfortunately, having to deal with these inconsistent, contradictory elements that we call the left in the U.S. and in Western Europe. I mean, they give political cover to imperialist intrigue all of the time. They take up these positions that just reflect their own unconscious and sometimes conscious liberalism, and they undermine the will of the people by not standing with the people. Your responsibility outside of Venezuela is to deal with your state, with your government. You are at the center of empire, one of the most vicious empires ever known in human history. So whatever issues or contradictions you think you see in these countries, of course, a discussion with comrades within the context of the revolutionary process is fine, and in fact is welcome. But when you take positions that are opposed to the process itself, that you have objectively sided with imperialism, you're no longer in solidarity. You're no longer a comrade. You, in fact, have aligned yourself with the enemy. And so often, when it comes to Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Peru, this arrogant, whitish left, and they tend to be white and whitish, if they're not white, take these Eurocentric, arrogant positions where they know better than the people themselves or what they should be striving for. They fail to recognize that in these countries are still engaged in a decolonial process. They're fighting for national independence, national sovereignty. They have their own objective national realities. Things are not going to unfold in the same way you think they should unfold based on your superficial understanding of what it takes to make revolutionary change, primarily in the North. Okay. So instead of them attempting to understand these realities, even if they may not be completely in alignment with them, they take these arrogant positions that objectively props up and supports imperialism. That's why you see the confusion, not only in Latin America, but you see the confusions around the issues of the war in Ukraine and even with Gaza. You get elements of the left now who have decided that there's supposed to be a difference between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and Donald Trump on the issue of Israel. There is no difference. Kamala Harris is a Zionist. She's married to a Zionist. They are, and she has made it quite clear they still support Israel and the so-called right to defend themselves against the occupied people. So now is the time for those so-called progressive and left forces to intensify the criticism. I tell you what, when the students come back, I bet you're going to see that happening. But
I can't wait till the school year starts again.
So this is the kind of arrogance that we have to deal with. We have to struggle not only against this backward state, but some of these backward left forces.
And you know what, Ajamu, you sort of answered my next question sort of halfway, but let me just get through it, because we got to get to the Kamala Harris piece and this election. But first, I want to ask you, before we pivot from the Venezuela piece a little bit, is, and this is something I always ask, because I think at this moment in this election in this country, people are deeply confused and indoctrinated. And they're not confused because I don't think people are confused because they are unintelligent, right? I know that people are confused because they are deeply indoctrinated by a very expert propaganda machine in this imperialist system that has been very effective at propaganda and indoctrination. How else do you get an entire nation of 330 million people to really believe and bring settler colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, and land theft and genocide into their national identity and celebrate it, right? How else do you do that other than through indoctrination and propaganda, unless, of course, you are a descendant of the settler colonists who did it and you're still profiting. But we have to deal with that reality, right? But when we're talking about these international issues, a lot of people in this country, particularly Black people, particularly in this election season, when they hear us talking about this election in Venezuela, they will say, what does this have to do with me? Why should I care? Especially now when we're about to possibly have Trump as president again. We should only be concerned about our material reality and our material conditions in this country. We can't afford to think about what's going on in Venezuela. What is your response to thinking like that?
Well, first thing I try to tell people who are actively trying to organize, that those kinds of comments should not evoke any level of frustration. Because as you said a moment ago, this is a consequence of the indoctrination process that they call education in the United States of America. The objective is to make people, quote unquote, Americans, with all the limitations that implies. So first thing. Second thing is this: we have to help people to understand that there's no such thing as a disconnection between the realities of North America or the US and realities in Venezuela. That we are talking about two nations in one global system. But at the center of that system is, in fact, the United States of America. And that this system has a certain character. And what is that character? That character is that it is a system that exploits and oppresses people, it destroys nations, and it has concentrated white power. Mm-hmm. So if you're concerned about the expressions of white power in the US, yeah, you have to understand that expression is global. And that if you believe that that power should be shifted away from this minority white elite to the masses, then you have to understand that every nation that's struggling against this empire is able to carve out space, is able to take some of its power back. That weakens the empire, and that is in our favor. That helps all of us who are exploited and oppressed. That's part of the global revolutionary process. So that is how we have to try to begin to frame this. That's why we tell people that part of the mission of the Black Alliance for Peace is to reclaim the internationalism has always defined the Black experience or the African experience in the US. Okay. We have to do that not because of something cute or hip or whatever, but because it's fundamental for us understanding the world and understanding our realities that we are dealing with in the confines of the United States of America. Okay. That, as Malcolm said, you can't understand the Congo unless you understand Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't understand Mississippi unless you understand the Congo. That kind of international perspective is absolutely vital. Okay. So this is what we have to struggle for. We have to understand, people have to understand that we are raising the issue of AFRICOM in Africa because it's an expression of white power expressing itself in Africa. But we connect that to the Department of Defense 1033 program is militarizing police forces across the country. These this domestic army we call the police, and we see the examples of what happens with those occupation forces with the sister they murdered last week. So we make those connections. This is one common struggle against a common enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the struggle we have to patiently engage in. Winning people back to consciousness and back to sanity, one person at a time, usually. So that's how we respond to that. That basically, you can't separate Venezuela and Gaza from us. You can't separate what's happening on the African continent from us. It's all part of one global oppressive system that is our common enemy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you broke that down. And I want to give people just a little example of what this looks like, because I have been privileged to see it as a member of the Black Alliance for Peace myself. And I just realized I forgot to tell you who Ajamu Baraka is. He is the chairman of the coordinating committee of the Black Alliance for Peace. So technically that means he's my boss, but I
No, no.
prefer to think of him as just my comrade and my brother, which he absolutely is. So Ajamu mentioned the AFRICOM campaign, Shut Down AFRICOM. That has been BAP's flagship campaign since its founding in 2017. And when I would talk to people about this campaign and about BAP, people would always say, well, how do y'all think y'all gonna shut AFRICOM down? How y'all gonna do that? How y'all gonna fight against the US government and the Department of Defense? And we just kept struggling with our people and explaining the need for solidarity and explaining the need to engage in this fight to end this militarism on the continent. So imagine what it was like for us to be here in the beating heart of imperialism while the countries in the Sahel began to carry out the very anti-colonial, now it's the anti-neo-colonial, anti-imperialist struggles that began in the continent in the 60s and 70s that were not incomplete, they were interrupted, because those anti-colonial struggles in the 60s and 70s were successful, but their success was interrupted by the response from the imperialists. So now we see the countries in the Sahel states do exactly what we've been campaigning to do since 2017, Ajamu, and that is to kick AFRICOM and the French out of their countries. Although they did it in the reverse order. First, they went for the target that they were the most, I won't say familiar with, but were the most active in their countries, and that was France, the French military. Right. And then after the French were made to leave, then they turned around and said, oh yeah, we see you, United States. We haven't forgotten you. AFRICOM, you need to get out too. So imagine what it was like for me, for Ajamu, for the members of BAP, for all of us who have been engaged in this solidarity struggle with our African brothers and sisters, to see the campaign that we have been engaged in since 2017 actually come to fruition, not because of anything we did that was so special, Ajamu, but just because we were on the right side of history from the beginning. We understood what the struggle was from the beginning, and we were reflecting the struggle of the people on the ground on the continent. Right? We weren't making up anything new. We weren't coming with any, special magic sauce. We knew this is the problem. AFRICOM is the problem. And this is what we need to focus on as the target of our campaign for the liberation of our people. So to see it come to fruition, it was revolutionary magic for me. Even understanding that the process is not complete, the struggle there is intensified because they've done this. And we don't know where it's going to end up. We're watching it closely, but to see those steps made, it was incredible for me. What was that like for you?
Well, it was and is incredible. As you said, we recognize as a consequence of our analysis where the empire was going to be vulnerable, and we understood that it had an objective to expand itself across the African continent. We saw that with the establishment of the Africa Command in 2008, and we saw the expansion of that under the Obama administration. But we also saw that in order for them to be able to establish a permanent footprint and to expand that footprint, they were going to have domestic support. And we knew that if we had a campaign to make people aware in the U.S. of these objectives, that based on the experiences we have had in the U.S. and our understanding of U.S. policy and our connection to Africa and African movements, that we could make headways. We could raise up this issue of AFRICOM to not only make people aware of AFRICOM itself, but what AFRICOM represents, which is imperialism, U.S. and Western imperialism. So we saw that possibility existed, and we organized ourselves. And what we have done, Jackie, is put ourselves in a position to now take advantage of these weaknesses even more so. And now that we have organized structures and institutions, we're in a position now to intensify this struggle on the African continent itself. We have a U.S. out of Africa network that's made up of over 500 members from throughout the African diaspora and the African continent. And now we are able to expand that. One of the things we did here in Venezuela was to deepen the ties with African revolutionaries that came to Venezuela, and to come up with plans to advance that struggle. And so, you know, this next month of action on AFRICOM is going to be a significant one because the objective conditions have changed and made it more favorable for us to really push out this and now you see I'm doing
yes, for those listening on the radio, Ajamu is still in Venezuela, and he is walking through this gorgeous, gorgeous house that I am very jealous that I'm not there. But he is walking through this gorgeous house, I think, trying to find a stable spot for the Wi-Fi so we can finish this interview. And is this not just like the life of an organizer? We go do the work. We go wherever we are called to. We don't even think about half the time if we're going to be able to have, you know, communication with people. We go, we do the work, and then our intention is to report back on what we're doing. And then we find out, oh, wait, the internet is not so good here. You know, we don't have Wi-Fi. We do our best to make sure we're giving on the ground reports. But sometimes that's not entirely possible because in some places on the ground doesn't have the best communication vehicles for us, but we continue to do the work anyway. And I really appreciate Ajamu taking the time to come and bring this information to us while he's still in Venezuela trying to navigate all of the things. So Ajamu, we got to get to this topic because it's my favorite thing to talk about these days. And that's this election, because it's a mess. and that's as much as I can say about it, because the views and opinions of this host might not necessarily be those of the station. But now that we have a presumptive Democratic nominee, and by we, I don't mean us, I just mean in the the electoral context in general. Because Kamala Harris is not my candidate, neither is Donald Trump. I do not vote for either of these political parties. I'm not telling y'all what to do. I'm just making this disclaimer for myself. But Harris's response to the election in Venezuela, I think, reveals where she is on that issue. And I think it reveals the larger and more pertinent reality of where she is in the context of US imperialism and its continuation. Where is she on this subject of Venezuela? And where is Kamala Harris in regard to the continuation of US imperialism, particularly through the kind of hegemony that we've seen used against Venezuela?
Well, first, let me say how much of a pro Jackie is. Y'all can't see me. I'm on camera. She saw what I was doing for a few minutes, but she kept on, and filled in.
I can't
I
help
really
myself.
appreciate it. You're right. I'm running up and down the stairs. Anyway, but this is a fun topic because it's a fun and serious topic. Those of us who lived through this Obama madness, we see some elements that are very similar. Is what I refer to as Obama 2.0 with a skirt. And we're not going to allow it to happen. And the conditions, though, are such where it won't happen in the same way. When Obama emerged, Black folks sort of went mad. They went insane. It was the culmination of a 50-year counter-revolutionary process whose main goal was to make the African in the U.S. an American. And they made significant progress toward that. With the emergence or the ascendancy of Barack Obama as the black face of white power, that process was almost complete. People began to identify in droves with the American state. Many of us remember how our people have always been skeptical when it came to U.S. policies. And many of us, as we were growing up, if we were trying to understand an international situation and didn't have a whole lot of information, you asked one simple question: what side did the U.S. Support? And you knew to look seriously at the other side. Okay, that was it was an instinct, a natural instinct, knowing the nature of this beast and the character of the people who run this thing. Okay, but that kind of critical consciousness, was under assault. People began to identify with the American state. People began to identify themselves as Americans and our nation and all this kind of stuff, and they identify with some of the most backward and reactionary activities that we're seeing from this government vis-a-vis the African world in decades. No other president would have been able to get away with attacking the most prosperous country on the African continent, Libya, using NATO and the so-called concern about human rights in Libya. No one else would have had, they wouldn't have dared to do that because they would have concluded correctly. It would have generated all kinds of opposition from Black and brown forces in the U.S. But with this pig in the forefront, that they were able to get away with that. They were able to get away with expanding AFRICOM across the African continent by almost 2,000%, while simultaneously expanding the Department of Defense 1033 program by 2,400%. Okay? And with all the killings that took place during the Obama administration, these killer cops, do people remember how many federal prosecutions took place of killing cops? If you don't remember, let me remind you. One, and that was Walter Scott because it was caught on tape.
Right.
Okay. So this is the nature of how white power operates. You know, they attacked Syria. He attacked Yemen. They pulled off a coup in Honduras. They pulled off a coup in Egypt. And then they laid the foundation for the war today in Ukraine when they pulled off the coup in Ukraine in 2014.
That's right.
And got away with all of this. Why? Because this Uncle Tom was in power and people were tickled to death to have a black face fronting for white power. We're not going to let it happen again. This Harris character is nothing but another Obama. It is a blackface fronting for white power. She has no policies that are different from Joe Biden. And a few policies she did have that were somewhat different. She has already renounced those positions, like her support for Medicare for all, single payer.
Right.
Okay.
Also for universal basic income, she has walked back her support of that.
Exactly. So I mean, this is so. What do you get with a Harris administration? You get the continuation of the neoliberal agenda that her bosses paid for. Remember, Kamala Harris was the candidate that came out the box in 2020 with the most money. She was backed by the same California-based oligarchs that were responsible for the coup in the Democrat Party that got rid of Joe Biden and inserted her with no votes. Okay, this is the nature of your so-called democracy. So no, we're not going to let it happen again. You know, and when the students come back, and when we began to agitate again around this whole Gaza thing, when people are reminded of the role she played as a prosecutor in California, and when people uh, uh, express what I consider to be a sophisticated politics that says we're not going to support you just because of the pigmentation, that we are about what kind of issues you stand for. That's going to signify, I think, a qualitative leap for Black politics, for progressive politics in general in the US.
Now we got about 4 minutes left for Darker Than Blue, but I have to ask you this question, Ajamu, because Kamala Harris is one thing, Democratic Party is one thing, but now we have had 40,000 Black women get on a Zoom call and raise $1.5 million for Harris. We've had 20,000 Black men led by Roland Martin get on a Zoom call and raise about $1 million for her. And not to be outdone, the white women are like, you are not going to say that we are not going to support this Black woman. They got on a Zoom call. 164,000 white women got on a Zoom call and raised, $8.5 million for Kamala Harris. The DNC has billions of dollars, billions and billions and billions of dollars. What do you say about these folks? Not about the Democratic Party, not about Kamala Harris. What is your response to these folks who have gotten together, put these resources together for Kamala Harris, but none of these people have put any resources together for, I don't know, people's rent, bail funds, tuition, little things like that, Ajamu. What's your response to that part of this whole weird election cycle?
This is this is the expression of class politics within the US. That there's been a consolidation of a middle class, or what we refer to as the petty bourgeoisie, and a bourgeoisie in the United States of America that's Black, that has a worldview that is very similar to the white petty bourgeois and bourgeois class, and that they then will fall behind a Kamala Harris just based on the fact that she's Black. So it's not surprising at all. But this is not the kind of politics that are going to liberate our people. And we raise a very simple question. At what point did Black people start supporting racial terror and genocide? At what point do Black people start supporting apartheid? And so we have to remind people that Israel is an apartheid, a racist apartheid state. And it is absolute madness for Black people to give their political support to a government that supports racial terror, genocide in Palestine, and provides continued support to apartheid in Israel. So we have to remind our people who we are, and not get too hung up on some of these manifestations of the class politics of the misleadership class.
Unfortunately, we are out of time here at Darker Than Blue. But y'all online at YouTube at Black Liberation Media, y'all stick around. We'll be here for a couple more minutes just for you. But listen, folks, listening to my voice, this is Jackie Lukman, and this is Darker Than Blue here on WPFW 89.3 in Washington, D.C., where we are making a difference one broadcast at a time. And here on Darker Than Blue, this is your location for politics, for all kinds of analysis, for socialism, and for soul. As usual, as always, the opinions and views expressed on this program do not always reflect those of WPFW and the station managers and so on. But hey, tune in again next week to hear more analysis of U.S. and international politics and whatever else I have on my mind. Thank you so much for joining us here at Darker Than Blue. Stay tuned for Garland Nixon with news, views, and as always, be good to each other, be good to yourselves. Aluta continua, the struggle continues, but if we keep fighting, y'all, I promise, Victoria Acerta. Peace, WPFW. See you next week. All right, folks. Oh no. I need to bring Ajamu back. Oh no. What did I do? I'm gonna drop this thing in the chat for him so he can hop on to this stream, because I can't keep the Zoom open because it's another show that they have to use that thingy for. So let me just get this to Ajamu. And hopefully he can hang out with us a little bit here. Oh boy, so we just want to hang out for a little while longer, y'all, to see if you have any questions for the comrade or for me. Let's see, have sent the StreamYard login. Please hop on that. So yes, this whole thing is just, this election is an absolute mess. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. It is the height, I think, of everything that is absolutely wrong in this country. But I think it needs to happen. This is the thing. I think that now we really need to be able to see how fucked up this system really is. And for some people, they really just didn't believe us for a very long time. Oh, that's not it. They didn't believe us for a very long time about how bad this system is, how entirely fucked up it is. But now, I mean, it's kind of hard not to see when you have to vote for either a con man, three-ring circus, carnival barker, sexual harasser, or a genocidaire cop. I mean, and the interesting thing is that everyone who has decided, as Ajamu said, to throw their support behind Kamala Harris have really just decided to accept everything about her that we established in 2020 was just awful, right? So you cannot tell me that 60,000 Black folks, that these 60,000 Black folks just have always been Kamala stands. No, they haven't. This is, as Ajamu said, petty bourgeois class politics. It is those Black folks who really do not like working class and poor Black folks. It's those folks hoping that they can get a little bit extra crumbs from Harris, and not really caring what she does to the rest of us here or around the world. She has still not improved in the polls. People are not sold on Kamala Harris. They really are not. And a lot of people who have decided to hitch their wagon to her, of course, in the Democratic Party, they're doing everything to coronate her like the Democrats have done before and like they will always do. I mean, the Democratic Party is making it clear that this is how they operate. And there is nothing anybody can say or do that is going to change when they just want to choose someone. Screw you and your votes. So now apparently the delegates have held a straw poll or something. I don't know. They did a call-in vote where now the very same delegates that 4 years ago, not one of them voted for this woman. Now, all of a sudden, 4 years later, now all of the delegates have given their votes to her. This is how morally bankrupt and hypocritical the Democratic Party is, especially since we're talking about a Democratic Party that has spent much of its vast wealth, in addition to getting money from AIPAC, to run liberal candidates against progressives in the Democratic elections across the country. Yeah, this is the Democratic Party doing this, running candidates who are less progressive, who are Zionists, who are supportive of Israel, who are supportive of the cops, supportive of the police, supportive of the military. Those are the kind of candidates that the Democrats are running against progressive Democratic candidates. So the Democratic Party is paying to run progressives out of the party, as progressive as what little bit of progressiveness they have shown. That's why Jamal Bowman lost his primary, because the Democrats and AIPAC funded the campaign of his challenger to make sure this is the Democratic Party. And people have, or at least they had, I thought, made up their minds that the Democrats were undemocratic fascists when they scuttled Bernie Sanders' campaign, not once, but twice. And then not one time, but 2 times. But now some of the same folks are like, oh, we got to give all our money to the candidate that the Democrats undemocratically again just propped up here for us to vote for. No debates. There will be no Democratic debates. There will not be. Yes, there's going to be a convention, but there will be nobody else running against Kamala Harris. She has the delegates to give her the nomination. When they have the convention, they will announce her as the nominee for the Democratic Party, and that's where this is going to go. You don't get a say in nothing. And they have made that clear. And these folks have decided that they don't care about all that stuff they were mad about that the Democrats did in 2016, in 2020. They're not mad about that anymore. They're not mad about that. Everything that we talked about Kamala Harris doing and being in her time as a prosecutor in California, as the attorney general in California, none of that. All these Black men who are like, this woman she has been the architect of mass incarceration in California. All the Black women who was like, no, she went after Black parents. She went after our Black men in California. Now, all of a sudden, all of that stuff is acceptable to these people. right? So even if you don't quite understand the difference between the petty bourgeoisie and the rest of us, the working class, poor and oppressed, that ought to be clear to you that these people's interests are not the same as ours when they can put their principles and their convictions down whenever it is convenient for them. And it's wild that when it's convenient for them is when they're going to elect someone who just in 2020 they established was not their ally, not their friend, an actual enemy, an actual cop. But now they're throwing all of their support behind this woman. Man, I don't, so because, and I'll let you in on this, I've had to start saying this disclaimer before the show, before Darker Than Blue. The opinions expressed on this show are not those of the station, blah, blah, blah. Because someone complained about the political shows on the network expressing our opinions about the candidates. So the FCC got involved and basically came down and told WPFW, told Pacifica Network that you stop doing that. The hosts of the shows can no longer give their opinions about the political candidates running for president. They literally said that. And the complaint was initially really about how we were offering gifts to people who pledged during the pledge drives, right? And people were saying, well, they're not offering gifts when they tell you how much the gift is worth. They're actually doing an inducement. So we're like, okay, we're not going to talk about the gifts during pledge drive anymore. We're just going to tell people, hey, please give us money. And then that turned into, oh yeah, the political speech. You have to stop doing that because you're a nonprofit, community-based station. So the hosts cannot give their opinions on the shows. The guests can say what they want. If you have a guest, the guest can say what they want. The host cannot give their opinions. And this, of course, to me is not a coincidence. This wasn't some random complaint. I know better than that. This is a coordinated attack on what's left of anti-establishment journalism in this country. That's what this is. This is a part of the neoliberal campaign to silence all dissent. And when I say neoliberal, I don't mean just Democrats. I mean Democrats and Republicans. Because do you notice that when we're talking about silencing people from expressing their opinion in the political sphere, we are talking about both political parties. Both political parties benefit from silencing dissent. So you notice when people are silenced for being against genocide and the criticism is toward the Democratic Party, you notice that the Republicans are not coming to anybody's defense. Do you see do you understand what I'm saying? Like when people like me and Sean get fired from our jobs, when people get kicked out of school for being against genocide, and we have criticism of the Democrats for arming and funding this genocide and providing political cover for the genocide, and then sicking the law enforcement institutions on people who are demonstrating against genocide. You would think that if the Republicans did not have the same opinion on the situation, that they would be, especially since the Democrats are supposed to be their opposition, you would think, well, we got to come out on the right side of this. We have to come out against the Democrats and we can use this against them in the next election. Well, you know why they don't? Because they benefit from us being silenced too. So they are fine with the Democrats violating our First Amendment rights, which should let you know that if you ever had First Amendment rights, it would never be this easy to take them away if you actually had them. If you really had free speech, it wouldn't be this easy to just shut your voice down if you really had it. Which is why we have always said that this is not a democracy and we ain't free in this piece, which is what we are fighting for, actual freedom. So no, the Republicans and the Democrats benefit from silencing dissent. So no, the Republicans are not on the right side of anything that the Democrats are on the wrong side of. The Republicans and the Democrats are on the same side of practically all of these issues, including abortion. Because, look, I've heard people say that the Democrats are a little bit better on abortion. Well, if you don't actually do anything about the things that you say are important to you, then as far as I'm concerned, you're no different from the person who is actively working against that thing. Because if you are not challenging the people who are trying to deny someone rights, then if all you're going to do is stand by and let their rights be taken away, you are complicit because you didn't do anything to stop it. This I feel like is like the cell phone effect. Like when we see people beaten up, assaulted, verbally assaulted or whatever in public, and we see people videotaping it with their phone, live streaming it with their phone, but nobody is actually stepping in and protecting the person being attacked. That's what this is. It's like that weird bystander effect that is going on. But only we're talking about people's literal lives here. So you can talk about that abortion is important to you, or gay rights, transgender rights are important to you. But if you are not actively challenging the people trying to pass policies who are that will take away rights from those people, then as far as I'm concerned, because you stood on the sideline and said and did nothing, you are just as guilty as the people who actually took folks' rights away. Because see, we fight with everything we have, however we know how. But people who just stand around and they say things, oh, abortion is so important to us. And, they're campaigning. The Democrats are now campaigning on protecting women's reproductive rights after they said under the Obama administration that protecting abortion rights was not a priority for the Democratic Party. He said that. And people can act like they don't remember that he said that all they want to, but we know doggone well we talked about that for months when he said it. So there's no way you can't know because we told you. So what we're seeing now in 2024 with this look, not a lot surprises me in this life. I've been through too much to be surprised by much of anything. But the way people have fallen over themselves to fall in line behind this woman has been, it's been eye-opening, but it has been illuminating. And it's actually, I'm glad Ajamu said it. It's been great because these people have proven in one day, these 40,000 Black women and this 20,000 Black men have shown us which side of the barricade they are on. They have shown us that they cast their lot with the empire. They have shown us that they want to position themselves firmly inside Kamala Harris's camp within the Democratic Party, within the empire, so that they can get what they believe is the return on their investment that they made in her campaign. They really do believe they're going to get a return on an investment, even for some of these people, if the investment is that they just don't get Donald Trump in the White House for the next 4 years. And I almost hate to tell them, but I think that may happen anyway, regardless of, you know, and they have made it clear to us that about the issues that we have been struggling against, fighting against, raising consciousness for, organizing around, the 1033 program, these Justice Department special programs or operations that they have carried out, that began, well, not began, but that were revived under Trump, allegedly to fight crime, but are just excuses to use all of that military equipment in the 1033 program and terrorize Black and other working class and poor communities, to keep them in their place, to remind us of where our place is in this empire. So I really do hope, and Ajamu can't come on for the rest of the show because he's got, obviously still in Venezuela. Something's going on in the house. I don't know what's going on in the house. He's probably they're probably about to have another meeting because he's doing a lot of these shows where he's doing report backs for the elections. So I'll definitely have him on just for you guys again, because we roll like that because we are doing a lot of work. But none of the things that we have been organizing around 1033 program, at shutting down AFRICOM, stopping Cop City, ending the genocide in Palestine, ending the exploitation and the genocide in Congo, all of the things. She doesn't care about any of those things. And these 60,000 Black folks who raised all this money for this woman in one day, they have made it clear to you that they don't care about any of these things. That's 60,000 Black folks. As far as I'm concerned, this is what we do with them. So that's it for me today. I have news that I cannot share yet, but things are in the works that are, they're very, very exciting, but I can't tell you what they are yet. I think I'll be able to tell you next week. So you're just gonna have to stay tuned. You're just gonna have to stay tuned to hear what it is. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. We'll see you next Friday at 5 o'clock. Have a whole new show on Darker Than Blue, have another guest, whole new conversation, and maybe a little bit of this, a little after party afterward then too. So I am going to go relax. I hope you do too. I will see you next week. Peace. Take care, y'all.